18, pretty much all black, had left the venue and were driving around aimlessly, hoping to catch a party to go to. Every place we went to ended up being a bust or getting busted by cops, so we were headed to go hang out with some friends around 2 to 3 a.m. It's important to note that none of us were inebriated in any manner. So by this time of the night, the roads were almost completely empty. We live in rural, suburban Northern Virginia, and it's incredibly dark as the car has broken high beams. The driver, Key, made a turn down a road and, seeing as it was incredibly dark, briefly drove in the wrong lane, no divider. It only lasted around 5 seconds or so, and absolutely no one was on the street, so she just calmly corrected herself. Right as she makes it to the correct lane, a car about 50 to 100 feet behind us turns on its headlights and lays on the horn. It seemed like this guy appeared out of nowhere, and I found it incredibly strange he didn't have his headlights on as it was a new moon and almost completely dark. So she waves her hand out the window and says sorry, but the guy was just not having it. He immediately sped up, riding on our tail and honking almost constantly, to the point we were going around 60 in a 30 zone. He was in a huge black truck waving a Confederate flag out of the back, and we were in a tiny green Kia, so we were understandably terrified. He even ended up actually ramming our bumper a few times, although not enough to dent the car or move it, thankfully. We were debating what to do, whether we should call the cops or not, when Key takes a few sharp turns and ends up losing the guy to stop in a parking lot. We wait super quietly under this shady tree, ready to drive off or call the police or both for a few minutes. One of my friends suddenly notices his truck parked in a few parking lots away, separated by a few trees in a way that we can see him, but we were hoping he couldn't see us. I don't have the best eyesight, but even I could see him jump out of the car. This guy was massive, wide and tall, holding something in his arms and waving it around. Another friend with more gun experience than I points out it looks like it could be a shotgun. We watch for a few seconds, paralyzed in fear as he yells something along the lines of, "Y'all Negroes need to come out." After we all wisened up, Key put the car into drive and sped out of that parking lot as fast as she could. We were visibly shaken and immediately went home so we could safely freak the fuck out, making sure to see if he was following us the whole way home. At 14, I moved in with my estranged father in a rural town in the USA. I found myself, a former city kid, living in a farmhouse on a plot of land that was a half a mile from the main road, surrounded by acres of forest on all sides. It was lonely and isolated. A few handymen who I assumed were buddies of my father's or something were working on various projects around the property. One guy named Dan was being paid a few $100s to dig a very large hole for some kind of plumbing issue behind the house. One evening while my father was away on a business trip to the city, Dan rolled up in his truck. That's a bit odd, but he probably made a scheduling error. I met him at the door to tell him that my dad wasn't home and to try back tomorrow. My father had a very strict rule that guys who worked on the property had to call him first before coming around. They were never supposed to show up unannounced. When I told him my father wasn't home, I was sure he would leave immediately. Instead, the expression on his face changed. Suddenly he perked up and smiled. He had very dark brown eyes that were set close together, and he stared with purpose. In hindsight, I'd say his stare was predatory. Also looking back, I'm fairly embarrassed by how naive and silly my answers to his questions were. I guess at 14 I was still trying hard to fit in and was excessively polite. There was a screen door between us, and he reached out and opened it so that he was holding the door in one hand while he talked to me. He started asking how I liked living in the area, and then he asked how I liked high school. I politely told him that everything was going well so far. "Are you going to the prom?" he asked. I had noticed around this time why his smile and dark stare was starting to bother me. There was something very deliberate, almost practiced about his questions, as if they were just all part of some memorized script. The wide smirk on his face never went away. "I'm sure someone has asked you to the prom," he said. I don't think so. I'm just a sophomore. But I'm allowed to go if I go with an older student," I told him. "I bet you have lots of boyfriends, right?" "No, I just moved here." He didn't pick up the obvious social cues I was sending him to leave me alone. I felt that sickness in my stomach, the nauseating and overwhelming sensation of terror. Despite keeping my cool, my mind began to spin crazy theories at me. What would I do if he planned on raping me? I was so far away from civilization, no one would hear me if I screamed at the top of my lungs. My mind raced through all the angles, the possibilities, the skills I should employ in this situation. "I can be your boyfriend," he said, still smirking, and again, "I'd like to take you to prom." I laughed a bit. No thanks." He took a step closer, as if he was just about to step right over me and inside the house. "What are you, about 16? He was now looking me over, and I mean looking me over. His eyes traced me up and down. It felt as if his gaze had left a slime trail across my body. "Not yet. I'm turning 15, I answered, at this point hoping he'd go away when he found out how young I really was. "Oh, that's okay," he assures me. "I like younger girls. I've had a lot of girlfriends who were your age. Are you sure you're not 16? You look really mature for your age." "Yeah, I'm sure," I said, still laughing off his comments while feeling absolutely trapped. "Look, I think you should go, because my dad could come home at any minute and, he hates when people show up unannounced, and he especially doesn't like visitors after he's been on the road all day. You know how pissed he gets about it." He shrugged. "Oh, it's okay. I talked to him yesterday, told him I'd be coming by to finish up the job, and he said he'd be home a little late. We can wait for him together, talk some more." While he never said that he wanted me to invite him in the house, everything about his body language and gaze indicated that he expected me to ask him to step inside. He was practically leaning right through the door frame. There was no way I was going to let him in, even though looking back that wouldn't have really mattered. It didn't immediately hit me, what he had just said and what it implied. He said that he had talked to my father and known he wouldn't be home until late. So what the fuck was he doing here? He went on more about how he would take me to the prom and how he would pay for it and treat me nice. What a nice girl I was, how beautiful young girls like me are at this age. And there was no lock on that screen door, and the wooden door was warped and had a clunky lock that took a while and a bit of a shoving to engage, so I just stood there and listened to this pervert. He presses again. "Do you want a boyfriend?" "No. Look, I don't date guys who are older, just high school boys. It would be really weird if someone your age went to the prom." I should explain, he looked about 45. "You shouldn't say that," he smiles. "Age doesn't matter. I've been with lots of teenagers. Some girls are very experienced sexually before they're 16. You seem like you've already had a lot of experiences to me. You're one of those types who is a grown woman in a younger woman's body, right?" I don't quite remember all of my dumb responses to him, but I remember very clearly his pressing to the point that age is just a number, and that young girls were sexual goddesses, that older women were bitter and angry, and he loved how happy and self-assured young teen girls were. I clearly remember he said, "You don't have to decide whether you want to go to the prom with me right away. Let's hang out a bit first and get to know each other." I finally said something to the effect of, I'm going back inside now. Have a good night. I'm probably going to call my dad to find out when he's coming home." There was no way that was possible. This was before cell phones were very common, and I had no idea where my father was at that moment. He took my hand and kissed it right between my first and second knuckles. I wanted to vomit. He said, "Okay, I'll be going. I hope to see you soon, Princess." Princess. I withdrew inside the house, relieved he was going. I watched him walk down to his truck in the driveway, started up and back out of our driveway, so I didn't bother trying to lock the door. Instead, I went to my room on the second floor. My window looked out upon a small stretch of dirt road that led to the main road. The truck, a white pickup, exited the driveway but pulled over further back on the road. I could see the tail end of it. It remained parked there without the lights on. I was confused. He had pulled out, then pulled to the side of the dirt road beside some bushes. But from that second floor window, I could clearly see that he had gone no more than 50 feet from the driveway. The truck remained there for about 20 minutes. I like to think that he wasn't trying to hide his truck from me, but I had been on the first floor. It would have appeared that he had driven away. When my father came home later that night, I told him about Dan's visit. My father wasn't outraged on my behalf, perhaps sort of bemused. He was more pissed about Dan being around the house at all. He said, "I fired him last week. He knows better than to be around here, and he should be calling first." So my father called up Dan and cursed him out for coming to the house when he had been specifically told not to return, threatening him with physical violence if he ever showed up on his property again. He added, "And don't talk to my daughter while she's here alone. You scared her." I learned later why my father had a rule about the guys who worked on the property and why they always had to call first before coming over. He was mainly worried that they'd rob him because the guys he'd hire were all ex-cons who charged a discounted under-the-table rate. Most of them, including Dan, were on parole for violent crimes and had very few job prospects elsewhere. Dan had recently been released from prison and my father didn't trust him. I don't know what his crimes were, but I can take a guess. I heard he returned to prison about a year later. My senior year, I was the battalion commander of my AJROTC unit. This means I pretty much knew every single cadet, whether I wanted to or not. In my class, there was one individual who was a sophomore and 18 years old. He never bathed and always smelled awful, so needless to say, I never got close enough to have a conversation. About a month before senior prom, I was without a date and very angry. My mother's friend had a son that was in my grade level, and although we hated each other, I ended up taking him to prom. That night, as soon as we stepped to the door, he ditched me, which was fine. I worked the room and danced with some friends, but when slow dances started, I was all alone. I started moving back to the lobby area where I bumped into this cadet from my class, John. John was in a very nice tuxedo, smelled like a flower bed, and had a very cute smile. I told him that he looked great and we started talking, as we had really never had a conversation before. The second slow dance was starting and he asked me to dance, but my date was anxious to leave. I gave John my number right in front of my date and told him to text me. In the weeks that followed, John did text me. A lot. At first he would tell me I was pretty and all that, and I ate it up. But then it started getting weird. John would ask me very invasive questions about my sex life and sexual partners. When I told him that I was a virgin, he told me that made him so happy. I started getting the creepy vibes from him, so I told him he needed to back off a little. He didn't, so the next day in class I looked him directly in the eyes and told him to back off. He looked sad, said he understood, and then asked for a hug. I just walked away. Fast forward a few weeks, he continues to text me and I continue to ignore him. One night after graduation, I'm laying on my bed playing a game. I get a text see that it's him, and after reading it, so I wouldn't keep getting notifications, I ignored it. I get another text from him shortly after that says, "Hey, I can see your house. Which window is yours?" I immediately bolt up and close my blinds. I call him and scream at him that if he isn't gone in 5 minutes, I will call the cops. He didn't leave, and after that I blocked his number and told him that any further contact would be reported to an authority figure immediately. Thankfully, that was the end of that. He still occasionally tries to friend me on Facebook, but I never accept it. So in 2013, we had our annual prom night for the Leavers Day, which was a big thing for our school. The UK has now become a mini version of the USA. All was good. No drinking, but we were having a great time, and me and my 5 friends were looking forward to the free house and loved the idea of the freedom that night would bring after prom. We brought booze, played FIFA, and just had a good time up until around 2 a.m. At this point, I'm beginning to feel the effects of the alcohol, and as tradition, we would always go for a late night/early morning walk just to catch a breath of fresh air and explore creepy places. We always did this and nothing seemed odd, but this one time it didn't feel right. My good friend suggested we go for another famous walk, and everyone agreed except for me and my other good friend. We were the most drunk and felt like sleeping. But after being peer pressured into going, we hit the streets, laughing and being teens. Now where we lived was an ex-mining town that hit a huge recession during the time the mines were shut down. But when the economy crashed around 2008, many people became jobless, so it wasn't uncommon to see derelict houses and junkies wandering around the back alleys. For some reason though, it didn't feel right. I had this feeling that shit was going to hit the fan. We walked to the outskirts for around 10 minutes, and with it being summer, the air was humid yet slightly breezy. Me and my friend Mark were lagging behind, barely seeing straight when a black car drove past. Again, not uncommon as people work nights, except a bunch of clearly stoned, angry-looking men began screaming at us. We laughed and carried on, but they came back. So me being the confident, brainless idiot I was when under the influence, I flipped them off and shouted, "Fuck you," to which everyone laughed and followed suit. Next thing we were all swearing at them, trying to look cool, and looking back on it, we were giving them the reaction they clearly wanted. As the car continued down the road, I kid you not, the car did a full 80 handbrake skid and began racing towards us. We bricked it and hightailed it out of there into a council estate as we ducked behind some cars, discussing our plan of action. By this point, we were being circled when the car stops dead in front of the parked car we were behind. We were all pretty big lads for early 16-year-olds, and we were reaching the 6-foot barrier, but even I'll admit, we all got frightfully teary-eyed and our hearts sank as a chilling voice shouted, "You better run if you want to see tomorrow." Of course we did, and in the moment of panic you tend to look for the nearest escape. So I did and followed, running as fast as I could, still keeping pace, even though I'm so drunk I'm seeing double before managing to split up in different directions. I followed 2 others into an alley, and the others darted towards the road which led to the next town over. Not the best place to go since it's mostly wooded areas and an old reservoir. My other buddy then, after some time to calm down, bravely went out onto the street acting drunk and confused and told them he had seen some lads running towards a subway further down the road. And no sooner had they pulled off in pursuit, he shouted to us, "You two wait there," and legged it back to my place to get help, only to realize no one was in because all our parents had gone out together. He was the oldest, so we trusted him the most, and he instead began to give us courage, calm us down, and guide us to safer places over the phone while me and my other friend ducked in an alley as we were circled by a car full of lads banging on the door, chanting and screaming shit like, "When we find you, we're gonna stab you." I at that point feared for my life. Imagine being in an alleyway while some madmen circle you in their car, clearly wanting to cause damage. We were surrounded by houses, so why we didn't just knock on the door I don't know, but we knew no one would help us at 2:30 in the morning, and I felt incredibly alone. I began throwing up, and no sooner had I puked, my friend grabbed me and literally picked me up over his shoulder and dove into the bush behind us as we watched the car roll by slowly, the passenger hanging out the door with a knife clutched. Scariest moment of my life, but thank God my friend who risked himself for me and didn't just leave me to take the shit. I still owe him for that. After meeting up with another friend across the street, we tracked ourselves like militants across the town until I received a phone call from my friend who we had lost. He was all alone on the other side of town and told me in a sobbing voice that they were right in front of him and that although they couldn't see him, he was concerned and explained that they were talking about how they were going to hunt us down. We sent Kyle, the friend we had just met up with again, to go and find him, leaving me and Mac all alone again. Thank God Kyle found him, and both made it out and back to Mark where they would be waiting anxiously. But of course, me and my friend Mac were still a good 15 minutes from home, and although the town was small, home is a long way when you're being hunted by fully grown men. For the next hour, we hid on tennis courts, commando crawled through the undergrowth while staying on the phone to my already safe friends. But what chilled me the most was the sound of a constant echo of a wheel-spinning car running at high revs as it circled around us on the surrounding roads and streets for almost 2 hours. 2 hours they were looking for us, which indicates they had bad intentions. We ounced up our courage and ran as fast as we could home, and finally we made it there and were greeted by the rest of the gang who had calmly waited in the backyard, and as corny as it sounds, we all just hugged it out and breathed a sigh of relief as we made sense of what had just happened and how we could have died or been seriously injured. We didn't sleep at all that night, and instead discussed our individual thoughts and point of views on what had happened. We still talk about it today, but a few days after the incident, it was evening and I was walking back with my friend Mark, the one who actually tricked them into going so that he could escape. We were just walking back to his house drinking Mountain Dew, discussing life when the same car eerily drives past, full of 3 scruffy-looking guys staring at us. A dark side street behind a supermarket, and the same car happens to roll by again. I double-checked the plates and it confirmed it was the car. I have a good memory and the plates were a very distinctive custom plates. We stared back and they just smiled and pulled off. Needless to say, we got out of there and got back home. But even now, when I hear a car wheel spinning or a sports engine revving in the distance, it brings back memories of that night. This goes back to 2002. I was a senior in high school and prom was right around the corner. I was single at the time, but kind of on off again with a gal. She asked if I'd like to take her to the prom, and I said, yeah, sure, why not? The week before, of course, she canceled. She wasn't going and didn't want to have to mess with it all. Whatever. Most of my friends except 2 were going, and one wasn't even from the same school district, in fact. Comes that day and I was kind of bummed out, even if not initially. So I meet up with these 2 guys, Dave and Jake, that evening. Jake somehow managed to get a 12-pack of Busch and a bottle of vodka despite being 18. The plan was to take Dave's car and go cruising, find a party to crash after the prom and get tore up. I didn't really drink heavily and still don't, but was feeling pretty shitty and didn't even care. We stopped by Dave's sister's house to get a CD, a Misfits CD. Jake and I wait in the car while Dave's rummaging through the house. While in the car shooting the shit, Jake gets a call on his phone from our buddy Mark from school. Apparently some guy or guys had been trying to put the moves on the gal he was taking to prom, and he stepped in to say something about it outside and took a punch to the eye. Now, Mark is a nice guy. He's pretty passive but looks like trouble. He wore a short mohawk and looked almost just like Heroin Bob from SLC Punk. This isn't the type of thing that usually goes on in his life. It was, however, in mine. I got into a lot of pretty stupid fights in high school. Apparently these guys, 3 of them told him if he wanted to talk about it further to meet them behind the school. So he's calling us. He doesn't want to look like a pussy in front of this girl and needs a hand. We got nothing better to do, so we make the decision for Dave before he has the chance to agree or object. Dave didn't seem to mind one way or another. We all kinda honestly thought if we showed up outnumbering them, they'd just back down anyway. So we get there, meet up with Mark, who's pacing around outside smoking a cigarette. Rather than waste time, we just agree to get this over with and go around behind the school. Unsurprisingly, given the events, it's crowded as hell, even behind the school. People are standing around, smoking, making out, puking, etc. Off to the left across the parking lot is a fairly narrow alley leading behind an office building and a church. Mark suggests they're probably there if they're still here at all. We agree and casually stroll into the alley. Mark's leading the way, all decked out for prom in a goddamn tuxedo even. Now to frame this part here even more accurately, this alley is narrow enough that all 4 of us can't stand shoulder to shoulder in it. Only 3 of us can fit at once, so we had Dave behind us. Mark wastes no time and yells, "Hey assholes, I'm back," as we're entering the alley. He didn't need to though. There was no way in hell they wouldn't have noticed us coming in. It doesn't take long. There's no squaring up. No shit being flung, it just starts. A scuffle. It's dark in the alley with only the light from the parking lot behind us spilling in. It's a tight fit with even 3 people in here, and there are a total of 7 of us all together swinging at each other, cussing all the way, and a bottle breaks somewhere along the way that, at the time, I remember thinking one of them threw at us. In short, it's utter chaos in the alley. It's hard to even discern friend from foe. It didn't last long though. Not only were the guys outnumbered, but apparently drunk to boot, which was probably why this all started to begin with. 2 of them ended up pushing past us after a pretty good beating and bolted across the parking lot. One even tripped and fell straight on his face on the concrete, but scrambled back up and kept going. That got Jake to start laughing his ass off. I was trying to tend to some swollen, probably broken knuckles, and Mark is cussing up a storm because he ripped the sleeve off his rented tux somewhere in that madness. One of the guys got knocked out cold, and I mean he's out, snoring deeply. If you've ever seen someone get knocked out, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's not normal snoring, but like loud, deep snoring. He's just laid out cold on his back in a fucking suit laying amongst trash and dirt. I asked if we should drag him out into the parking lot so someone can find him or something, but Dave just says, "Nah, fuck him." So we start to pile out of the alleyway with Mark saying, "Hold on, give him a minute, he'll catch up." We hear his zipper and turn around to see him with his back to us, and he's literally pissing on this guy. At which point Jake is almost doubled over laughing so hard he's wheezing. Mark gets done, zips up, and comes back outside still cussing about his sleeve. He thanks us and tells us to meet him back at his place afterwards. He was the only one of us at the time that lived on his own in a studio apartment, so we split off with Jake, barely able to control himself the whole time, randomly bursting back into fits of laughter. It catches on and I follow him in the laughter. It honestly was pretty funny. Mark pissing on the guy snoring so loud he could have set off a car alarm. The only one not laughing is Dave, who took a pretty good blast to the head and is complaining of a headache. We take off in his car though and intend just to go back to his place and hang out until after prom. Along the way he stops at McDonald's and buys a few burgers, asking if we want any. The night drags by from there. We do end up going to Mark's place after the prom, but don't stay too long as he kinda politely shoos us out so he can spend some alone time with his date. We were gonna call it a night, but Dave says we haven't even touched the booze in his trunk. But there's no way we can even take it out, let alone drink it near his place because his dad will beat him. Jake's mom doesn't even know he's gone, and hates Dave anyway from a previous incident involving booze. My house isn't gonna work either, so Dave decides we'll just drive to this abandoned movie theater a few blocks over and stand around outside. We agree, and that's exactly what we do. The idea that the police could find us here drinking becomes clear, and Dave decides to park on the block behind the movie theater, with us walking through a small little clearing of woods leading up behind the building. We'd been standing near the side of the front of the building cracking jokes and still laughing about Mark pissing on the guy in the alley. I wasn't drinking much. I don't really like beer, so I just had a few pulls from the vodka bottle. Jake was already getting wobbly-legged though, and Dave had already stopped feeling a bit lightheaded. Suddenly, bright lights pour into the parking lot and a car comes rolling slowly in. It's about 20 feet away and turned with a passenger door to us. Dave says he thinks it's the police and to be ready to bolt back through the woods, something that's probably not going to be real easy for Jake. It's not the police though. It's a sedan of some sort, and a guy leans out of the window and yells, "What the fuck are you little faggots doing here on my lot?" Jake, ever the badass of course, yells back telling them to fuck off. The guy starts to slide back into the car and then opens the door to let himself out, and the driver turns off the engine. The guy getting out yells back, "The fuck did you just say to me?" Jake kind of wobbles for a second, then pushes past me and yells at the top of his lungs, "I said go fuck yourself!" and launches a half-full bottle of vodka at the car. It falls short and smashes several feet in front of the guy. Then all the doors open, and the driver and 3 more guys from the back seat come pouring out. One of them has a baseball bat. Without even hesitating, I just grab Jake's collar and slap Dave on the shoulder and say, "It's time to go now." And we take off towards the woods. We hear them start running behind us as we come crashing through the bushes leading into the woods. Jake is stumbling all over the place to the point where I'm having to hold onto his shirt sleeve to ensure he doesn't take a dive. We get to the car, which is luckily unlocked, and dive inside, as we kind of half-ass toss Jake into the back seat, who's laughing like an asshole as he tumbles in. Dave's starting up the car as we all turn and realize they didn't follow us all the way. At least if they did, we can't see them. The woods aren't thick enough to really hide too well in them, but it is pretty dark. At this point, it's probably after midnight. There are only 2 ways out of the block we're parked in. One goes all the way around the entire neighborhood, and the other's behind us and goes back around the front of the movie theater. We decide to just go back that way as fast as we can. We probably should have went the long way around, but none of us were completely thinking straight or even really sober at that point. As we come around the bend leading in front of the movie theater, the sedan is coming out of the lot, not even 3 feet from Dave's car as he passes by. I'm sitting in the passenger seat and make eye contact with a passenger from the sedan. He's got a shaved head and is shirtless, and he just flashes me this evil grin as he points at us and says something to the driver. They pull out right behind us and are right on Dave's ass. The passenger is leaning out of his window and yelling something that I can't hear over the Misfits CD in the car. And then he throws something that clunks off the roof of the car and goes skittering over the hood, a tall boy beer can. We're coming up on the 3-lane highway that's dead empty, and these guys start to speed up and try to pull up alongside my side of the car and swerve into us. Dave panics and hits the brakes, which causes them to slightly clip his front bumper and bolt ahead of us. He then starts forward again and tries to slip behind them into the other lane. They cut him off and start to pull up against us again, this time on the driver's side. The passenger is hanging out the window again, this time almost sitting on the door, and rears back and swings something towards the car. It's the baseball bat. He misses and the car swerves for a moment. Dave is wide-eyed and muttering, "Oh shit, oh fuck, shit." Even Jake has quit laughing at this point. The car swerves back and Dave is trying to move to the far end of the lane. The passenger swings again and connects sort of with the driver door. It clips the rearview mirror and knocks it back. Dave rolls down his window and in desperation throws the only thing he has at hand back at this guy. First the CD case, which misses the passenger and shatters against the top rim of the door, and then a handful of as much loose change as he can grab from his console. Quarters, nickels, dimes, and pennies go flying. Some of it hits the passenger in the face and arm, and some sails into the car, some missing entirely. That seems to have some sort of effect as the passenger pulls back into the car and Dave floors it. Another minute or two go like this, and as we're coming to an intersection with another car at the light, Dave begins to slow down and turns on his signal to turn into a parking lot of a Quick Trip gas station. As soon as the car stops, just get out calmly and quickly and we go inside. This is a police substation. It's safe. Just take a leak, buy a soda or something. Don't act like anything's up, Dave says as he pulls in front of the store. We get out and dart inside. Jake goes into the bathroom and is in there for a while. Dave and I buy a soda and some bottled water. The clerk asks us if we went to prom, how it was, etc. We keep small talk with him, hoping Jake didn't pass out on the toilet. He finally comes stumbling out of the bathroom, grinning. The clerk observes, "Looks like he had fun." Dave nervously forces out a chuckle and says, "He's not feeling so well. It's kind of hot outside." Which it was. Our friends have pulled into the back of the parking lot behind the gas pumps and are sitting there idling. Dave notices and nods to them for me to notice. I decide to try and stall some time and ask for directions to a Taco Bell that I knew full well is on the other side of town, saying we were trying to meet some friends there. The clerk is thinking on that for a moment and starts to give pretty detailed directions there as we notice the sedan apparently give up after having sat there for a few moments. We wait for the guy to finish, thank him, and then pick up a pack of Wintermint gum that we forgot, just to make sure and pass another minute of time or so. After getting back into the car, Dave says he's going to drop me off and then sneak Jake in through his back door to sleep it off until the morning. And that's that. We luckily didn't run into the crazy guys in the sedan again, and that ended a night that even 13 years later, I'll never